we're going to introduce a segment we taped earlier this week with David Brooks, New York Times columnist and author of a new book called The Social Animal. Take a look.
David Brooks, welcome to Top Line. Now, your new book has some very interesting insights in it, particularly around the areas of success that I wanted to talk about. How are we defining success in your view wrongly? What are we conceptualizing? You're trying to take us in a different direction in this book.
Yeah, well, we have a normal story. We tell about success. We talk about grades and SAT scores and professional skills. But the things that actually matter are the things happening below level of awareness, unconsciously in the realm of emotions, intuitions. And one of the things, there's this great scientific revolution happening. We're discovering what's happening deep inside our minds. And I sort of take the evidence from that revolution and just try to put it into one book and put it before people. So, and one of the things we're learning is that, IQ matters, but if you really want to know who's going to do very well in life, go into a kindergarten and ask the kids, who's friends with who in this classroom? Some people have an awareness of social networks, and if you're aware of who's friends with who, you can read people, you're probably going to do okay.
Well, I'm very heartened by that, David Brooks, because if you looked at my SAT scores, you would never assume that I could even read. But the point here, or certainly not do math, but that's the interesting question here. As you point out, the unconscious and how much that matters and intuition matters, and yet politicians want to talk about real hard numbers, right? And especially when we're talking about schools, we have the Department of Education and we have other folks out there saying we need to see numbers. So how do you balance those two things, actually showing success in the school and being able to actually teach kids that those numbers aren't always the most important thing?
Right. Well, that's how I got into this project. I was trying to research why 30% of kids drop out of high school. And we've tried everything, and we've really not been able to succeed at changing that. And so one of the things you learn is it's important to test, and it's important to test for numbers, but it's also important to come to school knowing how to relate to teacher. And so you can take a test of how kids are relating to mom at 18 months old, and you can predict with 77% accuracy who's going to graduate from high school. Because if at that early age you know how to build a relationship with mom, because you've had a two-way set of communication, when you get to school, you'll know how to attach to teacher, and you'll just be way ahead. So a lot of the skills that we in the policy world don't like to talk about, if you use the word love at a congressional hearing, they look at you like you're Oprah. I mean, they just are not comfortable with it. But that's actually what's mattered, and I'm not like the most natural touchy-feely guy on earth, but that's where the evidence takes you. So you got to think about the things that are really happening deep inside.
What are the implications for politics? You talk about the subconscious being so important in all of this. What does it mean for how people vote, the choices they make, the politicians they choose? Who gravitates toward the field of politics?
Yeah, it's like everything else. We have an official story we tell about politics that people are weighing each party's health care plan and making a decision. I personally have never met a person who did that. What we tend to do is
only
we
in
look
Iowa,
at
they say that.
Yeah, they say that. But what we're looking for is people who feel like us, and who we relate to, sometimes consciously, sometimes unconsciously, who we bond with. There's an experiment done at Princeton where they took two faces of two rival candidates, and they gave research subjects 1 second to look at those two faces. And those research subjects could predict with over 70% accuracy who was going to win that election. And they took those faces and they took them to Mexico, Russia, Africa, and they had people look at the faces. They could also predict. So we have these models in our head of what is competence, and people gravitate very quickly to who they feel is competent. And so one of the things politicians have is just these phenomenal social skills. They lock right into you, and that's really what marks the successful ones.
So what does this tell us, though, David, about how we should cover politics as reporters?
Well, we should cover character, and we should cover the emotional connection. And again, we're not trained at this. The whole culture is really good at talking about material things and things we can count and put in a poll number. And we're really bad at talking about emotion and stuff like that. But if you pay attention to that emotional connection, well, it's hard to cover Bill Clinton without paying attention to this stuff. But if you pay attention to that, you'll get a sense not only of who's going to win an election, but when an emotional tide is going to sweep across the Middle East, as has just happened, or when an emotional tide is going to sweep across the financial markets, and you're going to get bankers all around the world doing extremely stupid things at the same time.
And this all makes me intrigued by a column you wrote a couple weeks ago focusing on Mitch Daniels, and you talked about Mitch Daniels as you called him the most likely nominee in your judgment of the Republican Party. Now, you say a lot of things about Mitch Daniels, and notwithstanding that haul that was found in his Princeton dorm room, I'd hazard a guess that he isn't the guy that had the most friends in kindergarten or has the most friends now. What is the appeal of Mitch Daniels, and how does he navigate this? What's his path to the nomination?
Well, as I said, what people are looking for, the word that comes up in some of the research is competence. When we hire a plumber, when we look at a teacher, when we go to the dentist, we have an image of our head as what is competence. So it doesn't mean we're necessarily electing the most gregarious person on earth. I mean, Richard Nixon was elected twice. And even Barack Obama is not a touchy-feely kind of guy. But people have templates in their head of what is competence. And so I think, especially for the Republicans this year, if they're counter-programming against such an elegant figure as Obama, I think Mitch Daniels happens to be the right kind of person. He looks kind of nerdy, and he's not the most charismatic guy, but he does exude that kind of, okay, I'm going to get the job done.
All right, David Brooks, New York Times columnist, the author of the new book that's called The Social Animal. Go out and get a copy. Thanks, David. Appreciate your time.
Great talking with you guys. Thanks.
All right, and that's it for us. Have a great weekend. From Top Line, at Amy E. Walter and Jonathan Karl at John Karl.